He's written 14 books. His first one spent 137 weeks on the New York Times bestsellers list. But what makes him unique is he claims his co-author is God. Is he a modern-day prophet or a snake oil salesman? Hi, I'm Ernie Manouse. Coming up on InnerVIEWS, our conversation with Neale Donald Walsch. Is the God that we understand as the Judeo-Christian God real or not?
Yes, of course.
Then the teachings that we follow, are they accurate or not?
To the degree that they are, and to the degree that they're not, they're not. That is to say, not every single word, not every single crossed T and dotted I would be what you and I would call accurate. But what one can understand why they wouldn't be. The information we received, the information we're talking about, is thousands of years old.
It was then initially inspired by God, the God that you deal with today in your writings.
Yes, of course.
Explain where you came to know God in this current version, I guess is a way to put it.
Where I came to know God, in my heart, in my soul, in my cellular experience, in the day-to-day living of my life, not from some book or from some preacher, with all due respect to books and preachers, because I've been known to write books and I've been known to do my own share of what you'd call preaching. But I think ultimately we have to come to know God in our own interior experience, and everything else is an assistance. I help along the way, but it's not the destination. It's the roadmap, but it's not the destination.
Conversations with God started when you had written a letter, if I understand the story correctly. At a difficult point in your life, a lot of questions, and you wrote them out. Then what happened?
I received an answer. I began literally hearing an answer. It began in my experience as a voice that I heard right over here, just over my right shoulder. And quickly that voice, if you please, I want to say moved inside of my mind, just kind of like melded. It sounds like a Vulcan mind meld from Star Trek, but it just became an interior part of my experience. And I began to hear answers to the questions that I was asking. I think I'm describing here, Ernie, the process by which people are inspired in all manner of ways to do all manner of things. I mean, where did Michelangelo get his images and the ability to transfer them to some exterior surface? Where did Mozart receive his melodies? Where did Jefferson find the words to write that extraordinary document that he drafted? Where does anybody receive inspiration? So I think that we receive inspiration in all of us in the same way. Ultimately, something from the exterior of our reality, from the universe at large, becomes part of our interior experience, and then it moves through us, as us, and comes into the world through us individually. And it carries necessarily the filter that each of us carry within us, and so it can't be a perfect representation of the original message. It never can be. We need to know that, and I'm very clear about that. But to the degree that it has value, that it brings sustenance and help to people, and beauty and joy and love to people, to that degree it is an addition to our culture and a wonderful gift from life to life itself.
At the very moment you heard that voice, what was your instant reaction? What did you think at the moment was happening?
That someone had come into the room. It was 4:20 in the morning, and I was shocked. I thought that someone had come into my house in the middle of the night. I whipped around to see who was there. There was no one there. Then I was frightened. I sat there, a cold sweat had run through me, just a chill. I thought, how could I have heard that voice? I mean, I heard that voice as clearly as I just heard yours. And so I was a bit astonished, and then I thought, I must be losing my mind. I know I heard a voice here. And I calmed down a bit, and I thought, well, okay, it's my imagination. And then that voice kind of like, as I said, moved inside of my mind, and I began hearing or receiving or having, if you please, thoughts that came in the form of a voiceless voice, like the voice of your own thoughts. And that voice stays with me to this very day.
How do you separate what are your own thoughts and what are the thoughts, the voice, the messages from God, if they are similar in your head?
I don't try to separate them. I've come to see that really they are one and the same, and that the difference in the quality doesn't depend on whether it's my thought or God's thought, but whether the part of me that imagines itself not to be God gets in the way. In other words, I don't really see it as my thoughts, God's thoughts, my thoughts, God's thoughts. I see all thoughts as God's thoughts. But the part of us that has individuated as Ernie and Neale can sometimes get in the way of that move through, that come through of the message, and can degrade the message, and can misunderstand the message, and can misinterpret the message. And so my job really is to get myself, I'm talking about my little self. See, I think of myself in two ways, Ernie. Little self, big self. Little guy, big guy. And my job is to get my little self, localized me, out of the way, to step out of the way, so that the universal me, that is the part of me that is connected to the universal reality and the total essence of life as it is, so that that part, that essence, can come through clearly and cleanly and with joy and love and wisdom.
People that have not read your writings would probably right now be very concerned with what you're saying and taking it as, is he saying he himself is God?
Well, I am saying that.
Explain why.
I am saying, but because it's the truth. I mean, Jesus said that. Many masters have said that. Many people have said that, and rightfully so. God has said that. Have I not said, ye are gods? It's right out of the scriptures. So,
why then does it anger so many people? Why does it frighten so many people to hear someone say what you're saying?
Because they have denied themselves. And I tell you that if we're not careful, we will all deny ourselves 3 times before the cock crows. We will imagine ourselves not to be God, not to be even made up of that which God is made up of, to have no connection with God whatsoever. The grandest illusions of humans is the illusion of separation from life and from God. And if God could talk to us directly, in fact, she can, but if she did so in a way that would be undeniable, that even doubters, even the doubting Thomases, could not deny it, I believe what he would say would be something quite profound. He would say, I am you. I am you. But for a very simple reason, Ernie. Let's understand who and what God is. There is nothing that God is not. Nothing that God is not. God is the sum total of everything, the all in all, the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, the left and the right of it, the up and the down of it, the here and the there, the before and the after of it. Nothing stands outside of that which God is. That would necessarily include Ernie and Neale, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
There you are. It's really quite simple when you think about it.
A lot of your critics would write, some of these teachings come from other sources. This sounds like an American Indian's philosophy of religion. This sounds Hindu. This sounds Buddhist. And they use that to say that what you're doing is wrong. How would you re-answer that?
Truth is truth no matter what the source. And the ultimate truth is nothing more than the accumulation of all the truths and all the wisdoms brought through all the sources known to humanity. Life is a process, Ernie, by which life informs life, about life, through the process of life itself. And so we'll see that the great wisdoms of all the wisdom traditions will bring us the same kinds of commentaries, the same kinds of noticements, the same kinds of truths. Of course what I'm saying comes from other sources. How could it not come from other sources? There hasn't been an original idea in billions of years.
Where do you go when you need peace and escape?
Inside. Right to my soul.
Why do you think God chose you?
God didn't choose me.
Why do you think you received the message?
Let's go back to your first question. God did not choose me as opposed to you. God chooses all of us because God is all of us. God is merely choosing God's self in every single golden moment of now. Life is a process by which life expresses life through the process of life itself. And the words God and life are interchangeable. Therefore, we can say that God is a process through which God expresses God's self through the process of being God itself. That is, through the process of being Ernie and through the process of being Neale. And that's what's going on here. So I have not been chosen as opposed to you. But here's what's happened in my life. I've had occasion to listen carefully, to observe closely, to experience fully, and to express wondrously the truth that is.
Before all of this happened for you, what did you believe?
Wow. A multiplicity of things. First, I believed what the Roman Catholic Church told me as a child. And then I began exploring many of the other so-called mainline religions through the years. And then I looked at the other wisdom traditions, the tradition of the American Native culture, as you just mentioned, of the Hindu culture, all the things you just talked about. Mm-hmm. I began to explore the ways in which humanity holds the experience of humanity itself. I began to look at that, not just the religious traditions, but the great wisdom traditions, the great philosophies, the great philosophical writers. I simply made a private study of what people were saying about people, of what life was saying about life. And I looked closely at as much of it as I could get my hands on. And so when you ask me what did I believe before this, oh my gosh, I'm not sure that I could land on a single thing and say I believe that, because my belief system has been the accumulation of experiences, one piled on top of the other for many, many years. I mean, I'm not a terribly old person, but I am 60, and I've done a little bit of looking at life.
When you talk about the way you receive the information you received, and then you share it with people, you send that information out, why should we pick up one of your books, read what you've written, as opposed to just sitting there and writing our own letter and listening for the answer to come?
You shouldn't. There would be I have no reason to tell you to do that. The question is right on point. You shouldn't do that.
So why do you publish?
Because not many people know what you and I have just said. Not many people think that they could bring through by simply writing their own book or their own messages to themselves or bringing their own wisdom through by whatever process it might be, simply singing in the shower. I mean, who knows how wisdom comes through? If we knew how Michelangelo painted his paintings, we wouldn't have to go to art school. Mm-hmm. Why go to university? Why go study? Because most people do not know the process by which pure creation and pure genius and pure wisdom flows through us. So we use these aids, we use these assistances, we use these systems of help that life has given to life itself. I use them, you use them, we all use them. And I've read all the sacred scriptures, or tried to read at least a great portion of them. Mm-hmm. What for? Why? When I could bring the wisdom through myself. Because it's faster, it's easier. I don't have to wait until I'm 106 to have wisdom befall me. An enormous amount of wisdom can be gained by reading the Bible. And I can read the Bible in a couple of months.
When you read the Bible, when you read these sacred texts, whatever they be, how do you internally know what's right and what's wrong? Do you get a sense, if God is with you and speaking through you, at the moment, do you understand something is out of context?
Let me quibble with terms here.
Okay.
I don't look at it in terms of what's right and wrong, because right and wrong are...
Accurate. How about accurate?
Let me develop my thought, if I might, Ernie. Right and wrong are a movable feast, and they shift from time to time, from place to place, and from culture to culture. And only dishonest cultures, only cultures that are amazingly dishonest and blind, do not acknowledge that. People who are honest, evolved beings are perfectly aware that right and wrong are a movable feast, shifting from time to time and place to place depending on circumstance and the exterior environment as well as the interior reality that we are currently experiencing. So I don't look at the Bible and try to make a determination of what is right and what is wrong, or even for that matter accurate or inaccurate, to use the term you wanted to go to. I look at what works and what does not work, given what it is I'm trying to do. Right and wrong really is a relative term, and it connotes kind of a moralistic judgment. But I look at what is functional and what is dysfunctional. That is, what works and what does not work.
For yourself?
For myself and for all the world. For myself initially, of course, because we have to look at things through the filter of our own experience. But then looking outward, if we're not to be just simply single-minded people, but to look at the world at large and the world around us, what works and what does not work for the world around us. If you think that all of the teachings to the letter, to the last crossed T and the last dotted I, of exclusivist organized religion is what works for the mass of humanity, you're not looking very closely at the world as it is. The fact of the matter is, the teachings of exclusivist organized religions are in some cases what do not work and what has rendered humanity wildly and massively dysfunctional. We're killing each other in God's name, shouting Allah is great while we fly airplanes into buildings, putting in God we trust on the very coins that we spend to drop smart bombs on civilian populations, looking for weapons of mass destruction that don't exist.
So how do we, as a culture, as a society, take what you're saying and make a change? Take what you're teaching.
By changing our most sacred beliefs. And we can only change our most sacred beliefs when we are willing to at least look at them and at least challenge them. And that's an act of great courage, because to even challenge our most sacred beliefs turns out to be a matter of, in some people's minds, blasphemy or apostasy. In fact, in some countries, we live in a wonderful society here. I can actually say these things on television here. You can ask these questions and I can answer them. That is not a freedom we should take for granted. In some countries of the world, right now, what I'm saying to you would be punishable by death. Not allowed to think like this, not allowed to express thoughts like this, not allowed to question the prevailing notion of things. And yet the death knell of every civilization that has ever existed begins with the refusal to question the prevailing notion of things. Now here's the condition we have on the planet right now, Ernie. Our technologies have raced forward with amazing speed. Our medical sciences have made breathtaking advances. Even our political sciences have made some forward movement through the years. The only thing that has not advanced at all in terms of its basic constructions and the basic thoughts that undergird those constructions is human theology. We are therefore moving into the 21st century with an ancient theological, ethical, and moral construction, much of which is still valid and good, but some of which is simply dysfunctional and never was functional. I'll give you simply one silly example. Deuteronomy says that if you have rebellious and disobeying children, you should take them to the gates of the town, report to the town elders that this son of mine is a profligate and a drunkard and a person who does not obey me, whereupon the town elders shall stone him to death. I could quote you chapter and verse from the Quran, from the Bhagavad Gita, from the Book of Mormon, from the Torah, from the Bible, from the sacred scriptures of virtually every one of the world's major religions, and I could quote you chapter and verse that you and I would both shake our heads at and say, well, that's either allegorical, it's either simply a myth that in which is meant to be found some wisdom, but certainly it's not to be taken literally. The sad part about it is, however, that a great many people do in fact take those teachings literally. In fact, we have constructed in our mind a God who is abusive, violent, and punishing, a vengeful God who kills. The Bible talks about God having killed thousands of people, and millions of people have been killed at the command or at the hand of God, if we believe the scriptures literally. People do in fact believe those scriptures literally. Not just the Bible, but as I said, the other scriptures as well. And they use those scriptures as their moral authority to continue the killing in God's name, which is why we see bumper stickers now all over the world that say, God, save me from your people.
I would think, though, the argument that would be used against that statement is that if this is the divine, inspired Word of God, who are we to start pulling apart and taking just the parts we want, as opposed to gathering it as a whole and following all of it?
Well,
and from that, I ask the question, is there any absolute truth?
Let me respond to that, first of all. The divine, inspired Word of God is nevertheless brought through very undivine and sometimes not altogether inspired human beings. No one can seriously read the book of Deuteronomy and say we should listen to that book word for word chapter and verse with every crossed T and every dotted I. There's not a person on the planet who would look at the book of Deuteronomy and say we should obey those rules to the letter. So clearly, they were either brought through and interpreted in a way that was meant to be allegorical and not meant to be applied as literal truth, or they were in fact mistaken, the result of somebody's hubris or mistaken notion of how things are. Again, I can say the same thing about virtually every religion.
Right.
Is there absolute truth? Of course not. Truth is a movable feast.
There are no golden rules.
There are golden rules, but golden rules can also be changed. For instance, thou shalt not kill. Is that a golden rule?
The teachings that I grew up with would say it was.
Tell that to George Bush.
Let me go in another area.
See, I've just made a striking point that caught you a bit. Tell that to George Bush.
Well, I will say, reading your book, I would know that that would come.
Or the millions of people in the world who think that killing, in fact, is okay, given the circumstance. By the way, I'm not sure that I disagree with that. In fact, I do agree with that. I think that killing is okay under certain circumstances. But I only throw the question back at you. Therefore, what of the golden rule? Well, there is no golden rule that's inviolable, because every rule there is based on circumstance and conditionality. That's just what's so. To pretend that it is not is to move blindly into your life, assuming that certain things exist in absolute form. They do not. Thou shalt not kill does not exist as an absolute truth. Excuse me, it simply is not true. Absolutely.
And what I'm going to do is very unfair to you. I know you've written 14 books at this point, if that's an accurate count. And so to grab any single place and talk about it seems a bit shallow, but it's one a lot of people ask about, and it's the whole discussion about Hitler went to heaven. Before we get into even that issue, is there a heaven and a hell?
Not as we currently envision them, and the Pope has declared that to be true. The Pope said in an encyclical about 3 years ago now, the idea of a hell as a place of brimstone, of fire and brimstone and damnation, is an idea that was created in the imagination of humanity. It does not exist in ultimate reality. And the Pope declared that. You should read his encyclical of July 2001, somewhere in there. I can find it for you. The Catholic News Service can also drag it up for you as well. And the Pope said there that hell does not exist in the form that we have imagined it, nor for that matter does heaven. There is, however, a hell-like experience, the Pope declared, and that is the experience of imagining oneself to be separate from God. The experience of separation from God would be a hell-like or a hellish experience. And the experience of being one with God, of being unified with the divine, is what the Pope would define as heaven. Not some place with harps and angels and beautiful things and flowers and wonderful music playing all the time, but merely the interior experience of the soul's infinite union with the divine. Well, the Buddha called that nirvana. It's bliss. I mean, it's all the religions tend to agree when you get down to the fine print.
When you then pose the question, did Hitler go to heaven? What are you actually asking?
What is the process by which the soul evolves is the ultimate question. First, let me talk about the Hitler went to heaven statement, because I want to make it very clear that I'm extremely sensitive to the fact that such a statement taken out of context could be enormously offensive. In fact, frankly, it's offensive to me, taken out of context. One must understand the larger context within which the statement is made. First, the statement Hitler went to heaven is not meant to indicate that what he did was not shameful or horrific or terrible, or that it was somehow condoned by God. You need to be clear about that. Second, the statement Hitler went to heaven does not mean that Hitler escaped the consequences of his actions. Quite to the contrary, Conversations with God makes it very, very clear that every human soul experiences the consequences of their actions. But those consequences are not punishments. There's an enormous difference between the word consequence and the word punishment. Punishment is an artificial exterior overlay of an experience by one upon another. In other words, you do something I don't like, and I punish you. I cause you to have an experience you would not normally have. A consequence, however, is an experience you would normally have. It would be the experience that would flow normally out of what you're doing now. We call that cause and effect. One does this and one experiences that. What Conversations with God teaches is that Hitler went to heaven because there's no such thing as hell. That is a place where you are deliberately punished or caused to experience something you would not ordinarily experience as a natural consequence of your action. In fact, heaven is the place where we experience all the consequences of our actions, and by experiencing those consequences, evolve and grow and become the next grandest version of who we really are. And if growth and becoming the next grandest version of who you really are isn't heaven, then what is?
I thank you so much for talking with us today, Neale Donald Walsch.
Thank you.
To order a transcript, call 866-652-3378 or send $6.95 to the address on your screen. Please include the name of the guest.